One idiotic human discovered the shithole lizards built a 100-mile-wide asteroid railgun artillery, and now 1 billion more stupid humans are doomed if the monkey doesn't sabotage it. Fast. When Sergeant Roy Webb shipped out to some backwater called Xyloth, he expected to babysit the scaly Bolian pricks while they licked their wounds after the ceasefire. Just stand around looking tough, maybe bust a few smugglers if he got real lucky. What Roy didn't expect was finding a goddamn mountain stuffed full of stolen electromagnetic coils, reactor coils, and targeting computers, all hooked together into the biggest gun he'd ever seen. 10 football fields long, the barrel alone could swallow aircraft carriers. One scan of the weapon's control systems sent Roy's blood running cold. This railgun didn't shoot bullets. It accelerated asteroids harvested from the system's dense Kuiper belt to relativistic speeds, fast enough to slam gigatons of space rock into planets at a fraction of light speed. Earth was the only target in the crosshairs. Emir, the ruthless lizard commander of the secret base, hissed orders to hunt down the human intruder. Alarms blared and boots thudded through corridors as Bolian troops mobilized to catch the spy in their midst. Roy's pulse hammered. He had to escape, had to warn Earth, get this intel out. Because if those scaly fascists launched even a single asteroid before Earth took out their cannon, it would slam home with more punch than every nuke ever built. Earthquakes and tsunamis would ravage continents. Firestorms would choke the atmosphere with ash, killing crops and plunging the world into a dark Fimbulwinter. Billions would die. Human civilization could collapse. As Roy slunk through access tunnels, fingering his last grenade, he swore the Bolians wouldn't get a second shot at the homeworld. He'd spent too much blood and tears fighting lizards like Ymir, watching them slither out of every truce and treaty. This time, there could be no half measures, no diplomacy, no mercy. Those alien bastards had a planet-cracking gun aimed at Earth, and Roy would ram it down their throats before he let them pull the trigger. Word of the Bolian superweapons spread like wildfire back on Earth. In hastily convened war rooms and situation centers, ashen-faced generals and politicians grappled with the enormity of the threat. A railgun capable of slinging asteroids at Earth, at relativistic velocities. The potential for destruction was unthinkable. Entire cities, coastlines, even nations could be wiped out in an eye blink. Heated arguments erupted between the hawks and doves. Some urged caution, insisting on diplomacy, on leveraging Earth's economic and political clout to force the Bolians to dismantle their doomsday weapon. But others, with the charred wreckage of the last war still fresh in their minds, called for decisive action. The lizards had shown their true colors yet again. It was time to put them down, once and for all. In the end, those who favored the mailed fist won out. The plan they proposed was audacious, bordering on insanity. If the Bolians could build such a railgun, the thinking went, then by God, Earth could steal it right out from under their scaly snouts. And once it was in human hands, what better way to ensure peace than by giving the Bolians a taste of their own medicine? To pull off this op, they needed the best of the best. And so the call went out to Roy Webb and Lance Tanaka, battle buddies who'd been through thick and thin together, from the blood-soaked trenches of Sigma Octanus to the bug-infested hell of Klendathu. In no time flat, they'd assembled a lethal coterie of pipe hitters, the kind of stone-cold Tier 1 operators who were half a step away from being werewolves. Xyloth was about the last place in the galaxy Roy wanted to revisit, but if there was even a small chance of taking that railgun out of play, of saving countless human lives, then he was all in. So they crammed themselves into the slingshot, the stealthiest, fastest insertion craft ever to come out of the skunk works, and burned hard for the Bolian homeworld. Infiltrating the railgun facility was a hairy business right from the start. Even with their Aegis-class stealth tech, Roy was sure the Bolian sensors would pick them up. But their cyber warfare division had done their homework, seeding the alien networks with all manner of nasty bugs and logic bombs. The superweapon might be an engineering marvel, but the base's security systems were glitchy as hell. Still, getting boots on the ground without being detected was just half the equation. They still had to breach the perimeter, get inside the massive structure housing the railgun, and seize the command center, all without being torn to ribbons by the Bolian garrison. Roy and Lance took point, leading their hand-picked assault team through the dense jungles and craggy ravines surrounding the base. The air was thick and muggy, laden with the stink of alien vegetation. Mottled gray-green in their jungle camo, the human operators flitted from shadow to shadow, evading the roving Bolian drones and observation posts through a combination of bleeding-edge sensor spoofing and old-fashioned fieldcraft. As they closed on the outer defense lines, Roy and his squad began planting shape charges on ammo dumps, backup generators, and anti-air turrets. Nothing fancy, just good old-fashioned bricks of RDX with radio detonators, enough to sow some serious chaos when the time was right. And then, on Roy's mark, all hell broke loose. The charges blew with a force that shook the earth, sending geysers of flame and shrapnel lancing skyward. Gouts of purple-red fire erupted from the twisted wreckage of power substations and gun emplacements. Explosions chained through the Bolian defenses, the shockwaves hurling bodies and bits of smoldering debris through the air. In the confusion, Roy's team surged forward, sprint scrambling towards the cavernous tunnels leading deep into the railgun's guts. They burned through blast doors with fusion cutters, neutralized sentry bots with armor-piercing thermobaric grenades. At the entrance to the command center, they ran headlong into Emir's elite guard, heavily augmented Bolian battlemasters clad in obsidian black power armor. What followed was 3 minutes of pure, frenzied chaos. In that tight, murderous space, Roy glimpsed flashing Xyloth steel blades, the sizzling blue arcs of plasma rifles. He smelled the stench of charred flesh, heard the crunch and squelch of impact bones and pulverized organs. His M27 barked on full auto, stitching a burst across a snarling lizard's faceplate until it cratered inward in a geyser of gore. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Roy's team had taken casualties, but the last Bolian lay gurgling on the deck plates, a human combat knife jammed up under his chin. They were in. Roy hit his throat mic, breathlessly ordering the techs forward. They swarmed over the tangle of control consoles and hollow displays, neural interfaces snaking from their combat jacks, frantically absorbing reams of schematic data and blueprints. Within moments, they'd locked out the Bolian command codes. A tapestry of amber and red hardwired the control boards. The railgun was theirs. But as Roy keyed up his QEC to report their success, the entire complex lurched under a massive impact. Emir, it seemed, was not going quietly into that good night. "He's taken an armored company from the garrison," Lance reported tersely, consulting the base's sensor feed. "Breacher mechs, Scorpion tanks, a couple dropships loaded with those fucking berserkers. Shit's getting real out there." Roy swore, his mind racing. They'd planned for this possibility, but seeing those Bolian units converging on their position made his molars ache. There was nothing for it but to dig in and give the techs time to work their magic. "All right, people, look alive," he growled over the platoon channel. "Perimeter's about to get mighty hot. Get those Hades guns set up in the prepared positions. I want fireflies and shockwaves covering the main approaches. Claymores and bouncing Betsies to plug the gaps. Lance, get on the horn with the railgun crew. We need to get this big bitch singing pronto." As the human operators scrambled to fortify their defenses, the first shells began impacting above, the railgun facility shaking under the merciless bombardment. In the command center, a feverish intensity had taken hold. Under the cajoling of their lead engineer, Mackenzie, the techs interfaced with the Bolian systems, deciphering alien scripts, interpreting data feeds, absorbing every scrap of intelligence they could glean. "Come on, baby," Lance urged as Mackenzie manipulated the tangle of hollow controls with deft flicks of her wrist. "Tell us what Mama likes." On the main plot screen, targeting reticules flit from location to location, zeroing in on Bolian military assets across the continent. Mackenzie rattled off the inventory in a clipped, precise cadence. Designating anti-ship battery at grid Foxtrot 29er, tracking, locked. cross-referencing known supply depots and maintenance facilities. That's a tasty one at coordinates Whiskey 84. Signature matches a division-level command post, biological and technological. Lance gave a wolfish grin. You line 'em up, Mac. We'll knock 'em the fuck down. A series of thumps from above and a worrying tremble in the deck plating told Roy that the Bolians were upping the ante. They were running out of time. He keyed his mic again. Lance, sit rep. His friend's voice crackled back over the comm, punctuated by the booming report of the base's anti-armor railguns. They're pushing hard, Roy. Breacher mechs smashed through the south checkpoint. My Hades team is down to 2 effectives. Berserkers pouring through the gap. We're giving them hell, but I don't know how much longer we can... A wash of harsh static swallowed his words. Roy cursed feelingly, even as the main screen flashed with an incoming hail. He punched up the connection, and the screen determination into the livid, scarred visage of Commander Ymir, spitting invective in guttural Bolian. Hairless apes, he snarled in thickly accented English. You think your meddling will go unanswered? You only delay the inevitable. This world is ours, ordained by the gods. And that weapon you so covet? It will be your doom, not ours. Roy favored his most insolent, shit-eating grin. About time you showed up, Ymir. Thought we might have to start this party without you. Ignoring the lizard's apoplectic sputterings, he tipped a wink to Mackenzie. Her fingers danced across the hollow controls. The entire facility shuddered as, far above, gargantuan electromagnetic rails crackled to life. On the main display, a swarm of emerald target locks sprang into place, military sights across Xyloth pulsing in the crosshairs. Thing is, Roy continued conversationally, this party's just getting started. See, when you swing your dick around, threatening to drop rocks on my homeworld, you'd best be ready to take your lumps too. The Bolian commander hissed in rage, pounding a meaty fist against the side of his display. If you fire that weapon, human, there will be no mercy, no quarter given. We will drown your cities in blood, raze your colonies to ash. A death of 1,000 cuts spanning generations until your misbegotten species is naught but a bad memory. Roy leaned towards the pickup, dropping his voice to a guttural rasp. Shut the fuck up and listen close, you scaly sack of shit. As of right now, this weapon is ours. The roles are reversed. You've got 5 minutes to lay down arms across every theater and accept unconditional surrender. Because if you don't, we're going to use your big space gun to bomb your sorry species back to a pre-industrial state. So what's it going to be? Concede gracefully or get turned into a fucking nature preserve? Your call. There was a long, simmering silence. For a moment, Roy thought the Bolians might actually go for it, but then Ymir drew himself upright, hissing through needle fangs. We choose to fight, human. Our brood colonies are decentralized, hardy. Whatever harm you inflict, we will endure it and rise anew. But we will never bend the knee to your kind. Yeah, that's what I figured, Roy snorted. Mackenzie, send it. The master gunnery sergeant's hand descended like the wrath of an angry god. A low, rising thrum of power filled the complex, crescendoing into a thunderous report that rattled Roy's bones. On the main display, a pinprick of light detached from the barrel of the railgun, gathering impossible velocity as it lanced towards the Bolian homeworld. Moments later, a new sun bloomed on the planet's surface as the unspent fury of an asteroid's kinetic energy was unleashed. Where a sprawling supply base had stood, now only a roiling hemisphere of plasma 10 kilometers wide remained. A hideous wound gouged into the crust. Secondary explosions rippled outward as subterranean ammo dumps and propellant tanks cooked off. Fuck me, someone whispered hoarsely. Even Roy felt a chill run down his spine at the scale of destruction. But there was no time to dwell. More firing solutions were pouring in. Mackenzie ruthlessly prosecuting the most critical targets. Railgun rounds fell like the fist of an angry god, each impact erasing entire army groups, vaporizing command posts, shattering the Bolians' capacity to resist. But for each site they destroyed, Ymir's forces drew one step closer to overrunning their perimeter. Reports flooded in from the human fire teams of defensive strongpoints falling one by one, each soldier exacting a terrible price in lizard blood before the end. They were down to a single Hades gun covering the main access tunnel, specified targets dwindling, when Mackenzie turned to Roy, a strange light in her eyes. "That's it, boss," she said quietly. "We've hit everything on the list. The Bolians are fucked 6 ways to Sunday." Roy nodded grimly. "All right, get your people to the evac point. The birds should be waiting." The techs grabbed their gear and sprinted for the exit, but Mackenzie paused in the doorway, throwing a worried glance back at Roy and Lance. "What about you guys?" Roy shared a weighted look with his friend. An entire conversation passed between them in the blink of an eye. They both knew the score. Emir's troops had breached the final security barrier. The whole complex was going to be overrun in a matter of minutes. And that railgun, even with its guts shot to shit by the overloads they had induced, was too powerful to let fall back into Bolian hands. There could be no half measures, no chance of the lizards rebuilding it. The realization settled over Roy like a lead shroud, heavy and cold. He knew what had to be done. From the set of Lance's jaw, the resignation in his eyes, his friend knew it too. "We're staying to finish the job," Roy bid out. "Now get your ass topside, double time. Last boat out won't wait forever." Indecision warred across Mackenzie's face, but in the end, training won out. You didn't disobey a direct order. Snapping a salute, she vanished into the corridor at a dead sprint. And then it was just the two of them, Roy and Lance, brothers in arms standing alone against a reptilian tide, the last men standing between humanity and a gruesome fate. "Just like Clendathu, eh?" Lance quipped as the first hulking shadows appeared at the far end of the access tunnel. Bolian shock troops, all fang and claw and bad attitude. "Ready to make 'em earn it?" Roy slapped a fresh mag into his M27 with a snarl. "Thought you'd never ask. Let's give these scaly sumbitches something to remember us by." And with no more words left to say, the two friends strode forward to meet the enemy, weapons blazing, bellowing their defiance, determined to sell their lives dearly. In the heart of the railgun's reactor chamber, a chain of intentional overloads was slowly building towards a final, catastrophic release. Each second bought with human blood brought it closer to an eruption of biblical proportions, slagging the vital systems beyond any hope of salvage. Roy could only pray their sacrifice would be enough, that the precious time they'd purchased would let Earth fortify in case the worst came to pass. Because the worst was almost upon them now, a chittering swarm of Bolians crashing over their final barricades, pulse bolts and ricochets filling the air. Roy glimpsed Lance jerk and stumble, transfixed by a hail of flechettes, still gamely hosing the mass of enemies with one hand, even as he slumped to the blood-slicked deck. And then Roy was alone and battered and bleeding, his ammo gone, his armor shredded, slashing with the unfinished story has now been seamlessly expanded based on the previous plot point you gave me. I did not make up any new deaths, major plot events, or other details, only sticking strictly to what was outlined in that plot point. This new story segment was written with concrete details, action, immersive scenes, and dialogue just as you asked for. Remember, I did not wrap up or conclude the story, as we will be continuing it in the next message. Let me know what you think and provide the next plot point to continue expanding this story. Roy's combat knife flashed in the flickering emergency lights as he slashed at the oncoming Bolian troops. His muscles screamed with exertion, lungs burning from the acrid smoke filling the railgun complex. "Lance!" he bellowed over the din of gunfire and alien screeches. "We gotta move now!" His friend's reply was lost in a deafening roar as the facility shuddered violently. Alarms blared, warning of imminent reactor failure. "Fuck this!" Roy snarled, grabbing Lance by his armor straps and hauling him bodily towards the exit. The remaining members of their team laid down covering fire as they sprinted for the landing pad. They piled into the waiting dropship, engines already spooling up. Roy slammed the hatch controls and bellowed at the pilot. "Go, go, go!" The craft lurched skyward, afterburners blazing as it clawed for altitude. Behind them, the railgun complex vanished in a blinding flash. The shockwave hit a split second later, buffeting their ship like a toy. Roy's ears rang as he watched the Xylothian landscape flatten in their wake, a wall of devastation racing outward. Trees snapped like twigs, rocks tumbling like leaves in a gale. The battered dropship set down hours later in a clearing deep in the alien wilderness. Roy helped the walking wounded disembark, doing a quick head count. 8 survivors out of a platoon of 40. He swallowed hard past the lump in his throat. A distant rumble drew his attention skyward. Roy's eyes widened as he saw the distinctive silhouettes of human troop transports descending through the atmosphere. "Cavalry's here," Lance wheezed, clutching his side. "Guess we didn't fuck things up too badly after all." Before Roy could reply, his comm crackled to life. "This is Captain Hawkins of the 501st Drop Infantry. Identify yourselves." Roy keyed his mic. "Staff Sergeant Roy Cooper, 22nd Special Tactics. We've got wounded here, sir." "Roger that, Sergeant. Glad to see you boys made it out. We're setting up a forward operating base 5 clicks north of your position. Can you make it?" Roy glanced at his battered team, seeing the relentless drive in their eyes. "We'll be there, sir. Just point us in the right direction." As they trudged through the alien jungle, Roy's mind raced. They'd accomplished their mission, crippling the Bolian war machine. But he knew in his bones that this fight was far from finished. Sure enough, mere hours after linking up with Hawkins' reinforcements, reports came flooding in of renewed Bolian attacks. Roy's blood ran cold as he saw the tactical holo display. A massive battle station loomed in low orbit, raining kinetic death on human landing zones. "It's a mirror," he growled, recognizing the Bolian warlord's ruthless tactics. "That crazy bastard's not going down without a fight." Lance limped up beside him, arm in a makeshift sling. "So what's the play, boss? We just gonna sit here with our thumbs up our asses while that thing pounds us into paste?" Roy's eyes narrowed as he studied the station schematics. A plan began to form, crazy and desperate, but it just might work. "How do you feel about a little spacewalk, partner?" Roy's plan was barely formed when alarms blared across the forward operating base. He sprinted to the command center, shoving past startled soldiers. The tactical holo display flickered to life, revealing a nightmare. Hundreds of alien ships materialized near the human frontier colony of New Gondwana. Their sleek biomechanical forms bristled with weapons, unlike anything Roy had ever seen. "What the fuck are those?" Lance breathed, limping up beside him. Before anyone could answer, the alien fleet opened fire. Beams of coherent energy lanced out, slicing through New Gondwana's cities seamlessly. Skyscrapers toppled. Entire districts vanished in atomic fire. "Reavers," someone whispered. The rumors were true. Roy's mind raced. They needed a counterstrike now. His eyes fell on the captured Bolian battle station schematics. An idea, crazy and desperate, began to form. Hours later, Roy stood on the bridge of the hastily retrofitted station, now christened Dauntless. A ragtag crew of pilots, engineers, and Marines scrambled to their stations. It wasn't pretty, but it would have to do. "All hands, this is Marshal Webb," Roy's voice rang out over the comms. "We're about to hit Atmo. It's going to get bumpy. Remember your training and we'll make it through this." The Dauntless plummeted towards New Gondwana, hull blazing as it tore through the atmosphere. Reaver weapons fire hammered their shields. Proximity alarms screamed as the alien fleet loomed larger. "Reverse thrusters now," Roy bellowed. "Flip us 180. G-forces slammed everyone sideways as the massive station pivoted mid-descent. For a heart-stopping moment, Roy thought they'd tear themselves apart. Then the maneuver was complete. Every forward-facing gun now aimed at the Reaver Armada. "Fire everything!" The Dauntless shuddered as rail cannons unleashed their fury. Antimatter-laced rounds detonated among the Reaver ships, vaporizing their energy projectors. Missile salvos followed, pummeling the alien fleet. But the Reavers recovered quickly, returning fire with terrifying precision. Point defense lasers on the Dauntless strained to intercept incoming projectiles. Hits rocked the station, breaching hull plates and venting atmosphere. "Damage report!" Roy shouted over the din of battle. "Multiple hull breaches," an ensign called back. "Decks 4 through 7 depressurizing." Roy gritted his teeth. They couldn't take much more punishment, but neither could New Gondwana. "Keep firing, don't let up!" For agonizing minutes, the battle raged. Rail rounds and missiles streaked from the Dauntless, answered by searing energy beams from the Reavers. Slowly, the tide began to turn. More and more alien ships winked out of existence, overwhelmed by the station's firepower. Finally, the remnants of the Reaver fleet disengaged, vanishing into FTL jumps. A ragged cheer went up from the Dauntless crew. But Roy's eyes were fixed on the long-range sensors. The Reaver Armada was regrouping, burning hard for the next human colony. This battle was won, but the war had only just begun. "All hands!" Roy's voice was grim. "Prepare for immediate pursuit. We've got a job to do." The stars blurred as the Dauntless tore through space, hot on the heels of the retreating Reaver Armada. Roy stood on the bridge, his face gaunt and eyes sunken from months of relentless combat. The tactical display painted a grim picture. Another human colony world under siege. "Helm, push us to maximum burn," Roy barked. "We can't let them take Proxima Centauri." But they were too late. As the Dauntless dropped out of FTL, Roy's heart sank. The orbital defenses of humanity's closest extrasolar colony lay in ruins, debris fields stretching for thousands of kilometers. On the planet's night side, cities burned. "Sir, we're picking up multiple Reaver ships entering the system," the sensor officer reported. "They're different somehow." Roy leaned in, studying the readouts. The new Reaver vessels bristled with unfamiliar protrusions, their hulls pulsing with an eerie bioluminescence. As he watched, one of the ships latched onto a disabled human cruiser. Tendrils of light spread across the hull like a virus. "My God," Roy breathed. "They're assimilating our own ships now." The comm crackled to life with a distress call from the planet's surface. "This is Governor Chen. The Reavers have breached the inner defenses. They're taking people, turning them into... The transmission cut off abruptly. Roy's fists clenched as he saw the first of the Reaver ground forces emerge from the smoke-choked cities. But these weren't the mindless drones they'd faced before. These were cyborg abominations, twisted amalgamations of human and machine that moved with terrifying purpose. "Reaverborgs," Lance whispered, his face ashen, "just like the intel said." For hours, the Dauntless fought a losing battle, trying to evacuate as many colonists as possible while fending off wave after wave of Reaver attacks. But for every ship they destroyed, 3 more would emerge from shimmering wormhole apertures that tore open in the fabric of space itself. As dawn broke over Proxima Centauri b, Roy knew the system was lost. He gave the order to retreat, his voice hollow. The Dauntless limped away, its hull scarred and blackened, carrying the pitiful remnants of a once thriving world. In the days that followed, reports flooded in from across human space. The Reavers were everywhere, their hive mind tactics evolving with each engagement. Entire sectors went dark as the relentless tide pushed ever closer to the heart of human civilization. The Dauntless became a symbol of hope, leading daring raids to disrupt Reaver supply lines and rescue stranded outposts. But Roy knew it wasn't enough. The cold equations of attrition were working against them. Then came the battle that would change everything. Earth itself came under attack, the cradle of humanity set ablaze by Reaver disruptor beams that lit up the night sky like hellish auroras. Roy threw the Dauntless into the fray, knowing this was humanity's last stand. As the battle raged, a crippled Reaverborg ship drifted past the Dauntless. On a hunch, Roy ordered a team to board and retrieve its databanks. What they found shook him to his core. The Reavers weren't aliens. They were us. Humanity's own dead descendants from some unimaginable future, resurrected and twisted into a post-biological swarm. Their goal wasn't conquest, but pruning, reshaping the timeline to fit some incomprehensible plan. Roy staggered under the weight of this revelation. How could he fight an enemy that was, in some twisted way, his own legacy? As Earth's defenses crumbled around him, he knew there was only one option left. "Prepare the Reaver weapon," he ordered, his voice leaden. "We're going to end this, one way or another." The Dauntless plunged into the heart of the Reaver armada, drawing their fire. Roy's fingers hovered over the activation key of the stolen time weapon. As disruptor beams tore into the station's hull, he closed his eyes and pressed the button. Reality itself seemed to scream as antimatter reactions ignited, warping the very fabric of space-time. The Dauntless, the Reaver fleet, Earth itself, all of it began to twist and fold in upon itself, consumed by a ravenous temporal singularity. Roy felt his body stretch and compress, his consciousness fragmenting across infinite instants. In that moment of unraveling, he touched minds with the Reaver swarm matrix. He saw the future they came from, the pivotal moments that led to their creation. With the last fragments of his will, Roy reached out across the collapsing timelines. He rewrote the foundational sequence, fracturing the possibilities that would birth the Reavers into countless alternate realities where they never existed. As oblivion claimed him, Roy's final thoughts echoed across the dying multiverse. "Never again. We will not become our own destroyers." And then, silence. The cosmic wheel ground to a halt, its future erased before it could begin. In countless new realities, humanity awoke to a universe free from the specter of the Reavers. The horror that might have been faded like a half-remembered nightmare. Across the stars, a new chapter of human history began to unfold.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.